This Week in Radio Tech, episode 209, is brought to you by the Telos VX multi-studio, multi-line talk show system. VX is the first broadcast phone system natively supporting VoIP and SIP. Per-caller audio processing by Omnia brings out the detail in every caller, and Telos VSET controllers offer error-free call handling, call after call. Meet the Telos VX talk show system at telos-systems.com. Hey, Joe Talbot is here, and he joins Chris Tobin and me for a tech update on VoIP SIP for broadcasters, and we're dishing on drones. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host, and this is the show where we talk about radio technology. I know I say that every week, but it's what we do. We talk about things from, the microphone to the light bulb at the top of the tower and all the stuff in between. And we've got a good show today because we've got a couple of one of our usual co-hosts is with us, Chris Tobin, the best-dressed engineer in New York City or anywhere. Hey, Chris, welcome in. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm just recovering, as Joe mentioned earlier, from NAB travels and 5 days straight on standing up and walking around. It takes about 3 or 4 days for the muscles to relax and feel like you're back to normal. But other than that, things are good. A lot of great technologies out there this year.
I know you saw a bunch of them. We did a quick show together from the NAB floor a couple Thursdays ago, and but we can only hit so much, so we're going to talk about more from what we saw at NAB. Also with us, though, is my friend and colleague and your friend, too, technology friend, Joe Talbot from Pahrump, Nevada. Hey, Joe, welcome in.
That's right. Thanks. Good to be here. It's beautiful out today here.
You're, I've been to your home there in Pahrump, and you bought a fixer-upper, and it looks like you are fixing it up.
Yeah, I've kind of hidden some of the things that. Let's see if I can. Speaking of that, I got to turn the radio down here. Art Bell was just on the ham radio. He's a neighbor, but I'm working on my studio. I need to make it look at least as good as yours, which probably I won't be able to accomplish, but it's coming together, and I'll be hopefully doing future things like this from the studio. So won't need the headset.
Just remember, all you're seeing of my studio is what the camera allows.
You got to show us what the rest of it looks like sometime.
Well, it's not far. It's not far that way to the mess, and it's not far that way to the mess off screen. So
all those TV magic tricks. I'm not hip to that yet, but
it's so amazing when you walk into a TV studio and you see. Some of them are really clean, but others can be pretty junky here and there. But what's on camera, buddy? That looks good. That looks good. As I was starting to preface the show, this is the show where we talk about technology, and one of those technologies we'll be hitting on a lot today is this sea change in telephony, in telephone technology. A lot of good things, and also some things to worry about, especially with this net neutrality story that's been going around the web and the FCC's decisions there. So it's got Joe concerned and plenty of other folks too. Maybe for very good cause, maybe not. Maybe it'll all work out, but usually things do work out, but they take time doing it, and it's an uncomfortable, bumpy ride while they do. Our show today is again brought to you by the Telos VX multi-studio, multi-phone line phone system. Of course, it works with SIP, and it also works with other telephone technologies if you use a gateway to change those things over to SIP. We'll be talking about the VX in just a few minutes. All right, let's hit on a few things that we saw at NAB. And Chris, I was in the booth most of the time, in the Telos booth. You got to roam around a bunch. And during our show that we did from NAB, I don't know that you got to talk about some of the things that you saw. Can you enlighten us a bit on things that were interesting to you?
Well, let's see. A couple of things. First thing that comes to mind was the number of unmanned or UAV-type flying drones that are now available for broadcasters to use. We spoke to one of the manufacturers on the show at NAB, talking about how to use a multi-propelled helicopter device with a GoPro camera and inspect your tower and STL dishes and things above where you want to climb or go to. But there were some others that showed when you're walking through the NAB convention hall and you see these huge nets that remind you of, say, a circus and trapeze, and you say to yourself, wow, this is something I don't usually see at NAB. And all of a sudden, these little white things are flying all around with objects hanging from them. You're like, oh, I get it. It was an eye-opening experience. It was something just that opens your imagination and say, wow, how far have we come? And all wireless. It was video, audio. It was pretty cool. That was the first thing that came to mind. And then there was walking around. Again, this is probably the third year in a row that I've seen so many different ways you can mount a camera. The camera mounts were just everywhere. I don't know if you noticed that when you're walking around. It was the wildest thing.
Okay, so mount them to body parts, to sports
Everything.
devices, to
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 3 dozen manufacturers in one area that can mount a camera in the strangest ways and just imaginable. And then there was 2 companies that are known for the video products, for say video encoding or handling conversion from SDI to HDMI, things of that sort, have now introduced cameras. They have 4K cameras out. So companies that never did any camera at all now has a camera that's part of their portfolio of products. So again, the technology has shifted as we were talking about telephony and the things that are changing. Would you think 10 years ago, standing at NAB, you'd see a company who never built a camera, never known for cameras, suddenly introducing a 4K camera plus video recording and other enhancements that you could do with it? That was the guys at AJA.
Okay. What? Who's the other company that's making so many little video boxes now? Black Box not Black Box.
Well, that's
Black
it.
Magic.
They also
Black
came
Magic.
out with a camera.
Black Magic, right?
Black Magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, Black Magic Design is probably the proper name.
That's it. So they're coming out with a camera.
Yeah, I just think it's pretty cool. Well, it's similar to what Axia has done over the years, from the inception to where it is today, and how it's evolved and how things have changed in that realm. And now you look at the video world, and you're seeing a similar change or evolution in product design, workflow enhancements, and it's pretty cool. And then
actually, this is a pretty good point. It's worth talking about for a minute, and that is that, and this happens in other areas of technology too, not just the Ages of the world or Black Magic Designs or Axia. You look at traditional console companies like SAS. Well, they started out making routers, and then they made consoles that work with the routers, and now they have some IP technology with their console system as well. And then there's a company like Wheatstone, which started out making analog consoles, and then they moved to AES digital consoles, and now they're into making IP-based consoles as well. Logitech made some digital consoles, and then has moved into IP. But Axia never made analog consoles and never made digital consoles that weren't IP. They just jumped right into IP. And I don't say that to wave Axia's flag. It's like phone companies. Phone companies that started out doing landlines and ISDN are taking forever, some of them, to get into IP. And yet other phone companies who never were a phone company before have jumped right into IP. Joe Talbot, tell us about that. Is my observation correct?
Oh, it is, and it's also interesting how it varies around the world. I was having a conversation the other day with some people in Japan about how long ISDN is going to be around over there, and they seem to feel it was going to be around for another 10 years or so. And I know that in my experience in Japan, they tend to lag in certain kinds of technologies I'm not really clear why it is, but they seem to do that, and I predict that we're going to have POTS and ISDN over there for quite some time to come yet. As far as in the U.S., it's the wild west right now. It's settling down a little bit. The providers that do IP telephony have actually they've gone from kind of experimental and hobbyist to ready for prime time, and the biggest challenge you have is either bringing in, figuring out the best kind of circuit to bring in, or how to get it in over the internet if that's appropriate for you, and that's a choice you have to make. I'm always a little concerned about bringing it in over the internet.
And that's something that we'll talk about during the show. I know you have
Sure.
some real concerns there. We'll chat about that. I'm sorry. Back to Chris. So you were talking about how these camera companies, or companies that didn't do cameras, all of a sudden, bam, they're either with or even ahead of the traditional camera companies, the Ikegamis or the Panasonics or the JVCs or the Sonys. Is that what you observed?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Any of us who have done video work remember in the heyday, the Sony cameras and the HL79 Ikegamis, right? Those were the mainstays. That was the staple, the de facto camera that you would use for ENG work, and even the video post-production stuff, field production. Nowadays, it doesn't matter. You can go with the brand name if you want, but now it's like Do I see the video? How do I get it? Where can I put it? Boom, off I go. And as you pointed out, Axia never made consoles before. Now all of a sudden, Telos is now making consoles. Same thing here, with these new cameras. I was at a couple of booths with these 4K and 8K monitors, video monitors, and it's just like, okay, who are you guys and where have you come from? Never made a monitor before in their life. They were a semiconductor company just making screens, LCD devices for the industrial use, not even broadcast. So this year was a great year to be at NAB. I have to say, if you walked around with an open mind, you got to see a lot of stuff, and it gets you thinking. And that's, and as we'll talk about with telephony, the IP world is just exploding with opportunities if you're really willing to learn how to apply it.
I want to go back to these drones for a minute. This is so many engineers, love these drones. I've got one of the AR parrots here, and I've messed up one of the motors, so I've got to replace it. I've got the replacement. I just haven't done it yet. And they had the cameras built in, but then the DJI drone, that one's becoming very popular. And we had a gentleman, I'm sorry I don't remember his name, on the show 2 weeks ago talk about it. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to bring a working model along with him. They had him just down the hall. And I've got a friend in the broadcast business, Cam Cornelius. He works with the Dave Ramsey organization. He's got a DJI and putting a GoPro on it, and then doing some great photography all around the Dave Ramsey campus, and then on other projects that they're working on, various stadium appearances and things like that. How do we see radio stations, broadcasters, and broadcast engineers not only getting fun out of these things, but actually using them for work? And of course, one idea that comes to mind is some kind of tower inspections. Maybe they're useful for that, but what crosses your mind for these drones? How can we use them? How can we justify buying one?
Oh, it's going to be tough because, in some states, flying these things is becoming, how would you say, not against, I guess against the law, but local ordinances. But for broadcast engineers to justify using it, I'm thinking of my personal experience over the years. I could have easily used it at a couple of transmitter sites where we had our 500-600 foot towers, and from time to time we had issues with stuff on the tower. That would have been very handy, but I don't know if I could have justified the cost of, keeping a unmanned aerial vehicle in the transmitter room when I'm not doing tower inspection.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're an AM site and you have multiple antennas, if say when I worked for an AM station here in the New York City area, our tower sites are in the Meadowlands, it's swampland. So basically, if you didn't have hip waders, you couldn't get to the other towers outside of the walkway, the catwalks. A UAV like that or a drone would have been handy to take a look at the property, fly around the tower bases, see what's going on. The ground system radio's still in place, things of that sort. That comes in handy. But again, it's a question of, can you justify the cost for the occasional quarterly checks that you would be doing? Or do you come up with a new maintenance program and say we do it every month?
You mentioned something about legalities here, and there is a pretty recent article. It's from December of 2013 on the website GigaOhm, and the article is entitled, "So You Want to Fly Drones? Here's What the Law Says." And over a huge amount of the U.S., it's okay to do this. But I tell you what, I'll put a link to this in our show notes today, and you can have a look, or you can just Google GigaOhm and drones, and you'll find that. I don't know how. And they got some pretty good charts and graphs here and maps. So being a pilot, looks like they're describing the different classes of airspace fairly correctly. So anyway, that'll be interesting as to where you can and can't fly it. And the FAA is going to be coming out with some new rules on that. If they haven't already, there will be some new rules. I would think that, flying one to go to have a look at an antenna can save you a trip up the tower, maybe. Of course, if you break something, you're probably just going to break the drone. One of these little drones is not likely to hurt an antenna if you actually fly it into an antenna, right?
True.
Not likely to tear that up unless it's a wimpy little antenna.
Well, no, I mean, I think that the UAV drone approach is definitely pretty cool and different, but there are some. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a tower rigger. I was working at a tower site yesterday. We were doing some microwave IP work and required climbing a tower, and we were talking about drones. And he was curious because he was at the NAB also. And he's like thinking, "Wow, this is pretty cool," but it's a device that, it's a mechanism. You're flying in the air. You're in airspace that's shared with other, things like helicopters. Then he goes, what about the safety? Things go up in the air. They always want to come back down at some point. And I was like, well, yeah, that's one of them. And I said, what about if it gets too far out of range? He says it gets too far out of range. They now have this GPS method where it knows to come back home if it loses communications with the remote control. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but these links that control them remotely are not encrypted. So a man-in-the-middle attack could actually take place. So you could lose communication. It suddenly decides it's going to try to go home, and then you intercept with your signal and now take control of this device.
Sure.
Think about that.
Sure.
I only said that
It'll
because...
be interesting. I'm sorry, it'll be interesting to see if news people try to take advantage of this in some way that may or may not be appropriate.
I think they already have. I think they already have. Yeah. One guy was asked by police, to get the drone out of the sky. It was perhaps interfering with their work, and I get that if it's interfering. But yeah, there's a guy who he was not didn't work directly for a news organization, but he went out and got footage of accidents and then sold it back to news organizations. Yeah, Stringer. Which seems, look, they'll probably have some kind of certification for this and licensing in the future. Are you a licensed drone flyer? And do you have insurance? Insurance might be the big thing.
Yeah.
It might be that if you want to do this as anything more than a hobbyist, then maybe you're going to have to be licensed and have an umbrella, an insurance policy where if you break something, you're covered. You're bonded.
Well, let's not forget, if you happen to be somebody who's lucky enough to sit behind the stick of an RQ-4B, you're usually a licensed pilot. You've got years of experience and you have some airtime, and that's why you're able to do it. Oh yeah, the RQ-4B is a Global Hawk flying UAV used by the military. So let's think about this. If you're going to be flying something outside of the hobbyist realm, and typically when you're doing a hobby, say with helicopters and stuff of this type, you do it in a park or you do it in a controlled environment. Once you leave that controlled environment, what happens? That's my fear. I mean, I'd love to use it at a transmitter site for doing tests and stuff, renting it or doing it that way. But then, as you point out, you have insurance. You qualify to fly it. It's like a commercial driver's license. You have a CDL to drive a truck, or you don't. You don't get on the road without it. So these drones may have to follow that similar line of thinking. It's going to be interesting to watch what unfolds over the next year or two.
Hey, Joe, in Pahrump, I'm guessing you don't have any restrictions there, except you're not too far from Area 51.
Interestingly enough, on the ham radio here, Art Bell has one of these things, and a number of his friends do. And I hear the daily the trials and tribulations and successes that they've had, and they're having a great deal of fun with them. And it's pretty much the wild, wild west here. So we see a lot of that kind of activity.
Are they on the radio? Are you hearing any brand names or what's working well for people?
I have, and I regret that I don't remember what they were, but I'm sure I'll have to find out. Now, after seeing some of that stuff at the show, I'm kind of intrigued as well.
I don't know. It seems like most engineers I know, we all love remote control. We all love pushing a button in one place and having something happen somewhere else. It's just inbuilt. And to do that with a flying machine and then that has a TV camera in it. And back in the 90s, I was dreaming of, hey, why can't we put a little TV lipstick camera on an RC airplane and then wear some goggles, with a project, that into our eyes and fly that way. And I realize there's a lag there. There's, reasons why it doesn't work so well, and you can't turn your head left and right very well. So there's, your peripheral vision is kind of a problem. But this is interesting to me, and I know it's interesting to a lot of other engineers as well. Oh, by the way, our guest, whose name I forgot, thanks Dave Sarkis, his name is Willis Chung. He was our guest from DJI. DJI seems to have the upper hand on this at the moment. AR Parrot started things at least in the public realm a few years ago with the hobbyist type stuff. All right, we want to move on to something else. Have we beat the drones to death yet? Let's see. Let's go ahead. I guess we can go ahead and jump in. Well, anything else, Chris, that you noticed the show, or Joe? You guys want to jump in? Anything you saw worth talking about?
Yeah,
I did the usual. Oh,
go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
I just did the usual vendor Thursday afternoon. You've only got a few minutes to see how much you can see in half an hour, kind of thing. So I didn't see. Things were much the same. I mean, some of the Gates Air, the name changes and the organizational changes and things like that. But as far as a lot of new products, besides the drones, I didn't see a whole lot. But it may be because of the limited amount of time I had.
Chris?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I was actually walking around. I came across a company. What's it called? Free Access. It's a free AXEZ. And if you're in the process of building studios or say small home studio control rooms and stuff, and you need a raised floor. Now I mentioned the word raised floor, and all of a sudden people thinking 6 inches deep and computer raised the whole bit. No, this is not the case. This is what caught my attention. It's actually two sizes. Let me see if I get this right. 1.5 inches in height, and then 2 3/4 inches in height, and you can do a complete raised floor approach. It's made of steel. It's pretty cool. Free access. That's the best way to put it. You go to their website. The reason I point this out is when I was working at a radio station group here in New York City, I was part of the team working with the EAS and the OEM office in New York City, and we were in the brand new OEM center, and I noticed the floor they were using was very unique, the raised floor. This is 4 years ago, 5 years ago I noticed it. I'm talking to the guys at this booth, and I'm mentioning, where is it used? And he says, oh, by the way, you're from New York? Oh, we've done a lot of stuff in New York City government. I'm like, what? They showed pictures of the room that I used to sit in with Tom Ray. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a great system. I can't believe how well it works. Pretty cool. It was like one of the first times ever I've seen a raised floor approach that wasn't a traditional, 6 inches, 12 inches tall, pedestals, concrete squares, and, the whole 9 yards if you ever worked on raised floors and the annoyance it can be. But it was a really cool system to check out. That was one of the things I came across that just stood out of the blue.
I'm having trouble. It's just enough room to run modern day cabling, right?
Well, that's what it's meant for. Modern day cabling, most audio, Cat5. You could probably get a couple of triax cables in there, but I don't think you'd want to.
Right.
But it's designed for and I was talking to the guys, and they do a lot of flooring systems for commercial or corporate environments as well as broadcast. And what they've discovered is a lot of folks don't have the need for a deep floor anymore because everything's over Cat5 or Cat5 equivalent.
Right.
And that's where the system plays its strengths. And then you can, they also, I forgot, it doesn't adhere to the floor. You don't have to glue it in or do a 22-shot nail into the concrete. So you can actually install it and then take it out if you want.
Huh.
So it's a pretty cool system. And while I was at the booth, there were two major network engineering directors there, television network guys talking, and were very interested and found a use for this particular approach. So I was like, okay, if these guys are interested and actually are talking, there must be something to this. So it's pretty cool.
Can you I haven't worked hardly any place that had raised floor. A lot of TV stations do and still do, and a lot of that room that they needed was for delay lines, right? They needed all the cameras to have the same length of cable. So they had to take the length of the line for the longest camera, give them all that length of line, and coil all the rest of it up under the floor. But other than that, did raised floors start in computer rooms or in TV stations? Where was it? And why? Why not use the methods that radio stations tend to use, and that is go through the ceiling, down the walls? Is it really that much easier with a raised floor?
Actually, it is easier with raised floor. Two or three radio stations I've worked at, we've had raised floors. And then similar, I had 2 or 3 radio stations I worked at where we did not have it, and we did a cable tray approach. And I can tell you, the cable tray approach, though it was maybe easier to install, cheaper in the short term, it was a bear to deal with when it came time to running cable between studios, hauling out a ladder, running it through the cable tray. Oh, then you run into this problem. One place I worked at, the cable trays were so full, they no longer structurally were safe, and they had to stick stanchions underneath them. So, raised floors came up being, back in the days of early TV, to move cable around. And, they used to cut into the concrete and make little cable runs. And over time, data centers for computer systems, computer rooms started using raised floors because they also used raised floors to shuffle the cool air. So they forced the air from the bottom up through the racks and out the top to create a convection cooling. So that that's another way raised floors have been put to use. But this particular raised floor approach or access flooring system is designed for the modern day. If you're doing an Axia install and you have all Cat5 cable with a couple of utility, they have utility outlet capability too, so you can put power plugs in this floor. You got yourself a nice little system that only sits 2 3/4 inches off the floor, gives you what you need. You still can pop the tile, run the cables in, pop it back in, and go.
Yeah, it makes short guys like me look taller too. Yeah, it's like elevator shoes. for everything.
That too, yeah. Oh, but it was a really cool system. It didn't require securing it to the floor, so you could literally take it out if you're done. So if you're building a temporary broadcast setup, maybe for a 2 or 3 month period for a show. What's that?
I said, as they all seem to be now.
Right, exactly. You know.
Ouch.
You got
Sorry.
No, that's the truth hurts. But no, you got a great little system. I've worked on many raised floors that just once they're in, that's it. They don't come out.
Sure, that'd be how. Yeah. Hey, there's a product that we ran across this week that I thought we'd point out, and I think Andrew maybe has a picture of their webpage. It's from Fluke Networks, and I've always known Fluke to be making fairly expensive stuff. They've been making cable testing and things to measure near end crosstalk and far end crosstalk. But now they have a new little product called the Link Sprinter. Now, this would be pretty cool to have if you've got to go do troubleshooting. What it does is you plug a Cat5 cable into it. The Cat5 cable that supposedly would be connected to your Ethernet switch or your router, and you push a button and it does tests to make sure that is there PoE on the line? So would that circuit properly support plugging a VoIP phone into it? It checks the physical link. Are any wires crossed? Is the link okay? It checks for the presence of a DHCP server and sees if you get a DHCP address. It then checks for the veracity of the gateway. Is the gateway actually there that the DHCP server said was there? And then can you reach the internet? So on the one hand, for techs who normally carry a laptop with them or some other device that they can do a lot more extensive tests, this may not be useful. But if you want to do something quick, if you want to have an entry-level technician be able to run over to somebody's office suite, or just go here or there and just see, hey, is this thing seeing the internet? This is a quick test. It's $200. They have a $300 model that has a built-in Wi-Fi hotspot, and then you can connect it to your smartphone or your tablet and run a little app on that, and it'll tell you a lot more than it does with the unit itself. The unit itself, as you could see in the picture there, Andrew, if you'd scroll down a bit and show that again, the unit itself just gives you go, no-go indications for PoE, link, DHCP, gateway, and internet. They flash different colors, so you can tell something about them, but they don't tell you all about them. Also, when you use this thing, you set up an account with Fluke, and after you've used it somewhere, it sends a report to the cloud, to your account, so you can log in then or later and see what your results were on each particular test that you did. So kind of interesting, pretty cheap. You can carry it in your pocket, and so often we need to go somewhere and check out, hey, is this thing working or not? If you don't want to pull out the laptop and boot it up and plug this in, it does a whole bunch of tests just on its own. You can set also a you can work on it remotely on the little tester, and you can give it a set IP address, a fixed IP address, for example. If DHCP doesn't work, then you can give it a fixed IP address. Hopefully it'll be appropriate for that network. Joe, Chris, what do you think about this thing? I'm not going to buy one. I don't think I need one, but you see this thing being useful?
I think it'd be kind of cool, and I bet they sell them at Gray Bar. Yeah. Chris, if you were deploying this to your radio station, to stations, engineers at a station, what would you hope them to get out of it?
Well, I would definitely. I currently use the Fluke IQ cable qualification unit. This guy's a little more advanced than the Sprint Link, but I would definitely use that for where I used to work at a couple other places, a group of engineers where you have a multiple facility. I would definitely use that. What I'd expect would be guys be able to get a phone call from one of the end users in the facility saying, hey, having an issue with my laptop or my computer, I don't know what's going on, or maybe it's an audio codec that's plugged in or a video codec plugged into a LAN. That's a great way to plug in, go, take a look and see and go, hey, wait a minute, you're on VLAN 2 and you should be getting IP address X and you're not, you're getting IP address Y. Wait a minute, how did the VLAN change on this jack? And then right away you'll know what's going on. You say, hey, it's a quick diagnostic tool. I think it's a great little guy. I mean, it definitely makes sense. It's a I shouldn't say entry level. It's definitely a quick diagnostic tool for somebody who doesn't want to have to carry around, as I'll show you if those who can see video, the IQ tester, the qualification guy, which is about the size of a, yeah, I'm not sure what this would be the size of anymore these days.
A big multimeter.
A big multimeter, yeah, like a Fluke 76. But
now, does it,
in a facility that we have a lot of people running around, it makes sense.
The IQ, the box that you just used held up, does that do internet tests, or does it simply make lots of tests on cable?
This is pretty much for cable testing and also let you know if there's a switch connection and a few other things. Not for internet testing, that kind of stuff. But again, it depends on how you manage your network, what type of work you do as an administrator. A lot of times, this guy is all you need, or you have a couple other tools that Fluke makes. Sometimes a laptop works just as well. But for a quick, where you're managing a facility with lots of activity, that little guy, that Sprint, the Sprint Link, I think they call it, right? Sprinter. That makes sense. Yeah, Link Sprinter. You go in, because you already know what your network should be doing. You already know what should be going on in most parts of your facility if you're a LAN administrator. So you know already what you should be expecting. This tells you quickly what's going on, what you can diagnose and say, whoa, that's, as I mentioned, if you're doing VoIP systems, you're going to have a VLAN, most likely. So your VoIP is on one VLAN, your office traffic is on another, and maybe broadcast revenue traffic on a third. So right away, if you plug this in, it tells you what's going on and gets you DHCP, or it doesn't, or whatever you have, you'll know. And that's handy. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I worked in a facility where we had calls for issues with the IP connections, and all of a sudden we discovered, oh, somebody made a change on the switch and didn't tell anyone. And that's how we found out the hard way. So I think it was pretty cool. I mean, Joe probably would know best too with VoIP deployment and what you run into.
Exactly. The VoIP was a little more specialized, but I could see this just to get your basic stuff going quickly and know whether something requires further attention.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying this is a deep delving into. You're absolutely right, but it gives you that first cursory level look at, hey, I know what's going on, and you can make the call and go, guys, here's what the issue is, and you move on to the next level.
Exactly.
Hey, speaking of tests, one thing that's been a popular subject between me and Joe and our tech support guys at Telos and a lot of our customers is, once you know your internet is working, is it going to work well enough to do a voice over IP phone call, and how many of them? Could you use it for other IP audio products like a Telos Zip 1 or other IP audio codecs? And Joe, a long time ago, turned me on to the plethora of VoIP testing websites that will perform a test from your laptop or from your computer, from the connection that you have right then to a server, which we assume has pretty good bandwidth, and will test things like jitter and packet loss, and could test bandwidth and round trip time and variation in round trip time. Joe, tell us about these VoIP speed tests and what they're good for and what you can determine from them.
Sure. My favorite one is the Visualware one that's been around for quite a while, and you probably won't remember the name, but if you Google IP or VoIP jitter test, it'll come up. It's usually in the first few results. That'll tell you at that time how good, basically how good the thing is, how good the circuit is. And I say at that time because ever since Netflix, that time becomes very important. For example, my usual download speed here is about 8 megabits down. But what happens is at 3 p.m., Netflix rears its ugly head, and all of a sudden that drops down to 1 to 2. And the jitter goes way up along with it. So, so you probably want to be cautious. If you're doing a remote, don't go somewhere and do a quick check at 9 a.m. on a Saturday and expect it to be the same way a little later on if it's the public internet. That's improved a lot in a lot of areas, but I still run into variations like here that just really get in the way sometimes. But the Visualware tool is my favorite one because it has a lot of VoIP specific things. I mean, you can tell it what codec you're going to use, and it'll effectively tell you how many calls you could expect to be able to deliver on that circuit. And that's a useful thing, and the quality level and things like that. So, just Google VoIP jitter test, and it'll pop. Visualware's the one you want.
Uh-oh. I guess we lost audio from Kirk.
I lost audio from Kirk.
Well, how about that?
How about
Joe?
that? How about that?
You're back.
Yes.
Oh, you're back. Look at that.
Sorry, cockpit error. So most of these speed tests, a lot of them use the same engine. That code apparently is available, and
They license it, I think. Yeah.
yeah. But what my point was, it requires Java. And a lot of folks Java's a pain to run in your browser, or if you do like I do, I run Chrome browser on a Mac, and Java's not available for that. It doesn't work. Now there may be some hack or some very old version, but anything modern, no, there's no Java available for Chrome on a Mac. So I have to run some other browser to get Java to work. So my point is this: I wrote a white paper. I wrote a paper, an app note actually, about a year ago, and I'll provide a link to it in the show notes that shows which of these VoIP testing apps require Java, and they test for more stuff than the non-Java ones. But then there's some non-Java ones that use JavaScript, HTML5, and I've got a list of a few of those as well. So if you don't want to run Java, you can still do some basic tests. Just wanted to make that let people know that.
Excellent.
Hey, we're going to take a break here for an ad and for our sponsor, Telos. And after that, Joe, I want us to talk about what you've been finding lately in the world of voice over IP, SIP providers, and the legacy, the old iron, the big iron providers, and PBXs. It's been a year or so since we've talked much about that. A lot in that year. More than 100 radio stations have installed Telos VoIP equipment, and there are other brands as well. The folks at Comrex have an IP-based phone system available now too. JK Audio has come out with a little 2-line box to do SIP on it. So I want to get an update from you on that. And Chris, you've been doing yours, an IP solutionist, as you call yourself. I'm sure you've come across some interesting things as well to contribute. But for a moment, we're going to talk about our sponsor. Our show's brought to you by our friends at Telos and the VX phone system. Joe's the right guy to know about this thing too. The VX is the multi-studio, multi-line, and by the way, multi-codec phone system. Of course, it does G711. That's the codec that everybody uses when you make a phone call. But it also does G722. I kind of get ahead of myself, though. Let me back up and explain. If you've got a multi-studio radio station, and typically about 3 studios is the break-even point versus individual phone systems for each room. The VX is an overall phone system for all your studios. You can use it with an Axia Livewire system, or you can use it in a non-Axia environment. Doesn't matter. If you use it with an Axia environment, you don't need to buy input-output nodes as well. But if you use it in a non-Axia environment, let's say you've already got multi-studios of Wheatstone or SAS or various consoles, then you just buy a couple of our Axia's audio input-output nodes and a GPIO node, and you've got full access to all the audio in and out of the VX system. It handles, inside the VX, it handles up to hundreds of phone number definitions. It'll handle about 25 simultaneous phone calls. Now, those are calls that are actually on the air. Plenty more can be on hold. And so it works for all your studios. Let's say you have 6 on-air studios and 6 more production rooms. No problem. You are well within the capabilities of the VX system. You can bring POTS lines in through a gateway and convert them to SIP. You can bring ISDN lines in through a gateway and convert them to SIP for the VX. You can bring SIP directly in from your PBX or from an outside SIP provider. Whether it's a nationwide provider or a local provider of SIP, you can bring it in that way. You can also integrate the VX system with an asterisk phone system to give it more functionality. If you want to do, if you want to be able to create lots of mailboxes for contests and such. If you want to be able to have your reporters have a smartphone that registers to an asterisk server, that you can have them call into your on-air studios using G722, a higher quality phone codec, and get them on the air with 7 kilohertz of quality. So, do your own remote broadcast with an ordinary smartphone and a G722 app. So there's lots of possibilities. Whether you want to start small and grow, start small and stay small, or if you need to replace a huge system for a bunch of studios or a bunch of systems, more likely, share phone lines across studios and all that kind of thing, the Telos VX is really a great way to go. So you want to go to the web, check it out. Joe, I'm sure I've missed a billion things, but any other high points that we ought to point out about the Telos VX?
Well, it always comes down to how it sounds. That's my favorite. I just right before the show, actually partially during the show, a friend of mine up at a station in San Francisco put a system in, and I didn't have to give him a whole lot of information, but he basically put the whole thing in, asked me a few questions, and he was just blown away by the audio. And that's pretty much what I hear from everybody else. It's between the audio processing, the dynamic EQ, it just sounds smooth and live and upfront. And in some cases, it doesn't even sound like a phone call. It'll surprise you.
Well, if your caller is calling in from a phone that's inherently digital, like
Yes.
a cell phone or a wired VoIP phone, it's possible that the codec that's in the person's that's calling you, that's in their phone, the same ones and zeros produced by that codec are the same ones and zeros that show up inside the VX to get converted into audio. It's possible that it doesn't get transcoded. Now, sometimes it does. You might cross phone companies, but so you're right. The audio quality can be, I mean, considering it's G711 for most calls, can be pretty stellar. But if it's G722, we can handle that as well, which is also pretty amazing sounding.
I've heard a lot of PBX customers where they've implemented G722, and the customers are almost kind of disconcerted. It doesn't sound like a phone call, and it kind of throws them a little bit when it first goes in, but they like it after that.
Remember back in the 80s when we went from
Pin drop.
We went from the radio networks, the nationwide news networks, ABC, NBC, NPR, being distributed by AT&T long lines. We went from that to satellite distribution, usually SCPC analog. But it was such a difference. I remember we were playing the Winter Olympics from Sarajevo, Yugoslavia, on an AM station, and we were playing the hockey game, and we had people calling saying they didn't believe we were playing the Olympics, that we must have been recreating it somewhere. Because it sounded so clear. Well, that difference in clarity is well, I'm not going to say that's exactly what you get, but you do get a big bump in quality when you get off of analog phone lines and into SIP. And by the way, SIP is absolutely your key to moving from today's codecs, G711 and others that are voice quality, into codecs that are coming on now and will in the future, that eventually we're going to easily have 20 kilohertz telephone calls. Or you as a broadcaster will be able to take that in from your reporters and other people on your staff, and from special callers. You'll be able to outfit them with an app and call into your phone system. And if you're on ISDN PRI or BRI or POTS, you'll never get that. You'll only get that if you use SIP. And so the possibilities are just amazing for what's coming up. So you can do it now and be I hate to use the word future proof, but you can be ready for all the codecs that come along down the pike in the future. Accurate enough, Joe?
That was good. Kirk.
Okay. All right. Hey, so let's move into this world of SIP. Since Joe is available today to chat with us, and since the last time we talked, Joe, lots more broadcasters around the world have put in VoIP SIP phone systems, and so you've gained more experience in that. Not that you were lacking before, but maybe you can tell us about a bit about why are broadcasters moving. Why are engineers interested in this technology, and maybe what's holding them back from moving to this technology?
Well, a lot of times the driver for us has been the driver for making a system change in the studio has been the phone system at the facility changes. Like at a television station particularly, they'll put in a new PBX and it's going to be SIP. Anything that's current is going to be SIP. And when that happens, they kind of look and they say, oh, we've had this equipment for a long time. Maybe we could do it better. And they call us up and we say, yeah, you could indeed do it better. And it's kind of a game changer because you're going from having a bunch of POTS lines to having something that takes DID numbers. So they ask about how many lines it supports and things like that. And that's really not the right question to ask because the whole paradigm of lines goes out the window. Because we're talking about telephone numbers and the number of simultaneous calls and codecs and things that they never had to even consider before. So a lot of times it's because they're getting a new phone system at the facility or they just want to tighten things up.
Okay. In the last few months, I know that you've worked on some pretty complicated systems. I wonder if you could tell us and what we can say or about the installation we did in New York City with ABC.
Yeah, that was good. They had some interesting requirements, and I got a whole bunch of them during the show. By the way, they wanted a system to replace a whole bunch of old hardware. Rooms full of couplers on the wall, and rooms full of stuff that was designed specifically for them for an analog environment. So Disney, the parent company, has been deploying SIP in all their locations. Mm-hmm. So they thought it was a good time to look at the different options available to them. And of course, we came up. One of the things that they wanted us to work on was a thing they called dial-a-prayer. And it tends to be, how can I describe dial-a-prayer? It's a telephone number you call, and 50 or so of other affiliates can call into this number, and it's couplers. It's an audio feed, which doesn't sound really complicated in itself, but we implemented it in a few lines of code in some software. So the way the system actually works is you dial this number, and when the number is dialed, you hear ringing tone for a second. While that's happening, a conference bridge is put together. And then the system dials into a Telos VX where it receives the audio feed that's going to be fed to that conference bridge. Then it changes the conference bridge into a listen-only bridge, and then it starts letting people in to get the calls. To participate in the audio, hear the audio feed. So basically, all that's done with just a few lines of code and no extra hardware, and they're not using resources unless the system's being used. So it takes up the whole thing is in a 2U box in their network control center. It's very straightforward. And we've got some other things that they want to add on to it, and this has been kind of an experiment. And they see the possibilities, and they have all kinds of things they want to do down the road with it. So I expect to be hearing from them continuously.
I'm not even sure where to go next. There's so many questions. I guess I'm still curious about how an engineer goes about replacing his old trusted and true phone lines, POTS, maybe ISDN, maybe PRI, maybe for the longest time he's been getting phone lines out of his PBX. And as you mentioned, the replacement of the PBX is what triggers other changes in technology around the facility. I know engineers who love their POTS lines. They have no interest in changing, other than the POTS lines are costing them $85, $90 a month each. So they're spending literally hundreds, even close to $1,000 a month on POTS lines. And although maybe you shouldn't switch to SIP for the cost savings, or at least not alone, because if there are ways you can do SIP that could cost as much, I suppose. I guess what are you finding in engineers' attitudes about changing to this technology?
I have a good friend at a radio station that when they started out, they wanted the VX because they liked what it brought, but they were really concerned about this whole SIP thing. So what they did was we did gateways, and it worked. And but then I sort of twisted his arm a little bit and said, "Let me show you what it would sound like if we did real SIP, native SIP." So I said, "We'll just show you. This is a demonstration, no big deal." And I have a provider that I like to use for service over the internet. They're my favorite one. It's called Vitelity. Yeah. And so I logged into their website, and on my account, I added a couple of phone numbers in their market, and basically had him connect one of the ports of the system to the internet, and we set it all up. So within an hour or so, I had this all going, and he liked it so much he got hooked, and he started using the internet for his phone calls because it sounded so good, and the signaling was nice and tight, and everything. And I said, "Well, I just wanted to show you this. I really didn't intend for you to use it for all your calls," but he did for several months, and I think they still use it for some hotlines and things like that. And he likes the ability to do things like have phone numbers in different cities and all that, but he just mainly likes the sound of it and how good the signaling is, the disconnect supervision. And if somebody hangs up, it really goes away, things like that. But anyway, so I changed his mind because this went on. I really abbreviated the story, but this went on over about a year. So.
I kind of like, sometimes I liken moving to SIP technology. I don't know. I guess the way it was when I first heard about voiceover, when I first heard about IP audio, Livewire, I first read Steve Church's white paper, and I really had to read it over and over again before it began to make sense. I mean, for 3 decades, I had been wiring equipment. Here's a Gazauta on this piece of equipment, and here's a Gazinta on this piece of equipment, and I run a wire between them. And to think that the same cable that's bringing in my email is also going to bring me my phone calls, I guess for the longest time, I didn't get that. And I'm not always still sure that I do. It's kind of magical. What would you say? What would you advise an engineer who just, you can tell he's kind of hemming and hawing about this technology because I'm not sure he gets it, and I'm not sure that he wants to learn it. What are the, what can you tell and somebody who doesn't understand this? How can you help to analog this in some other ways, perhaps?
Oh, I have various methods. Sort of depends on the guy that I'm talking to. I mean, a lot of times I'll just say, humor me, try this, and we'll set it up in a painless way. And
that's a good idea.
Generally, well, it works. It's a trial close, right? But honestly, I really believe in this stuff. I got rid of all my POTS stuff. I've been without it for a long time, and I never look back. I mean, I can do things I could never do before. It sounds better. It's just anyway. So I'll do that, or I'll talk to them and we'll say, well, let's do a mix. I mean, let's have some. You keep your POTS for emergencies or disaster recovery, and use the SIP for the other stuff. And they find that they never use the POTS for anything after that point because they get hooked too. And I also tell them, I mean, you want to consider whether you want to bring in a dedicated circuit or use something over the internet. And I generally have them do a dedicated circuit because if it really matters,
sure.
It's not best effort. It's actually really predictable.
Well, let's talk about that. Okay, so my little radio station in Mississippi, we've been on voice over IP for a long time for our business phones, and we're going to bring our POTS lines also over to voice over IP. But that's actually the second example I want to go to. Tell me more about the first example. If you want to get dedicated wired service from some SIP provider, what are you typically looking at? Can you get this in small towns, big cities only? What typically is available?
Well, the big cities tend to do it because, I mean, frankly, the small towns, if you've got reasonable internet, can get away with the other. I mean, it's like your Mississippi stations are probably pretty well served by what you've got, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the medium and larger cities, all the providers are typically available. I mean, a lot of times they'll want to bring it in over a T1. If you can get it some other way, that's always nicer because then you don't have the limitations that something coming in on copper brings with it. And that varies by market too. I mean, there's places in Florida. I'm dealing with stations in Tampa and Orlando right now. And Orlando is AT&T, and AT&T historically doesn't take care of their copper anymore. They've sort of abandoned it, and they're trying to get out of the copper business. But Verizon over in Tampa, just a few miles down the road, takes wonderful care of their copper. Their copper plant works really well, and I think it has to do with hurricanes, but they've got buried copper and fiber, and they do a great job with it. So it's not such a big deal there. But the last mile decision, how you get that last mile delivered to your facility is probably one of the most important ones you can make. If fiber is available, I would always go for the fiber unless you've heard stories that the fiber provider is really dicey, but generally they're not. Generally, they're always better than the copper provider.
So I take it then. Let's say here in Nashville, one of the alternative providers available is XO Communications. You've probably dealt with XO a time or two. How will they typically get something to your building? They have their own infrastructure. Will they resell some AT&T copper?
Depends on the building you're in. For example, we have them in Cleveland, and we have it's 5 bonded T1s because they don't have any fiber in that area right now. We're looking at some other options in Cleveland at this moment. There is a fiber that's running down 15th Street, right next to us, basically. Yeah. And there's some other companies that say they'll put fiber in, and that's always a good deal. So, and the fiber provider may not be the carrier itself. It may be a metropolitan area network that has a connection at they call it a meet me room, which is basically a place where they can patch any provider to the fiber or to any other provider.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, for example, the stations down in Tampa, the Cox stations in Tampa, they've got more internet options than any place I've ever seen. I mean, they've got copper, fiber, several fibers, several wireless. Wireless is a good option. Fixed wireless is a very good option, by the way, depending on your market.
Really?
So, yeah, you got to look around. It's surprising what's out there, and in some places, it's surprising what's not out there. It varies wildly by market. I mean, it's amazing. So, we try to get an opportunity to have a phone call with somebody who's making that kind of a change, and just run ideas past them and see what they've investigated, and to tell them share our experiences that we've had with other providers in other cities or possibly in their city. So those conversations are always really good. We can often come up with a way to save some money and come up with something that's more reliable.
Hey, if Chris Tobin is still handy, Chris, are you there?
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Good.
Listening
So
intently.
in New York City and in the areas that you tend to frequent, if you want to get hardwired service from an IS from a VoIP provider, a SIP provider, is it always going to come in on some kind of Verizon copper or fiber, or are there other infrastructures in the area? Tell me what the situation you find there is.
Well, I've worked on 2 projects recently. One of them was with Metro Ethernet, it's Verizon's fiber delivery system for businesses, formerly MCI Business. That's a whole history of it. But they happen to bring fiber into buildings, and then from there they split out the fiber to the various devices to give you IP or broadband for VoIP. For SIP trunks, if you choose to go with them. There's still copper delivery of a lot of the SIP stuff. And recently I've been working with a company, Rainbow Broadband, as Joe pointed out, wireless local loop type of company. And they provide point-to-point wireless drops, and you get your internet and you can do whatever you want with it. You do a SIP, you broadband, everything. Another company I was working with is Tower Stream. Same thing.
Yes.
So here in the New York City area, you have a couple of choices. You could do wireless from your building to a tier 3 or tier 2 backbone, and off you go. And now you're not dependent on the phone company. You're actually point to point with a company that basically their business is to keep you up and running.
I would not have thought that you'd recommend wireless that heavily, but so it's
here's the difference. When we talk wireless, I've worked with a couple of radio stations recently when we're talking wireless for stuff, and they're talking Wi-Fi unmanaged. 5.8, 2.4 gig stuff, blah, blah, blah. When you're dealing with wireless local loop folks, they're dealing with licensed frequencies, managed SLAs, service level agreements, and carrier class approach to delivery. So right now I'm working with a company who's providing us internet capability or IP for a audio link for a major government agency. And it's been over the public internet through their network, which is wireless, into the backbone of the internet. And it's been flawless. I've been monitoring it. The codecs will email me if there's a problem. And traditionally somebody would have been like, "What are you, crazy? You're in the building where you are. There's a fiber drop. You should call up AT&T or Verizon and get their connection from there." These guys came up with the right solution. It works. It's solid. Their goal is to stay in business, and they make sure that they give you carrier class connectivity. That's the trick. It's like VoIP systems. You have 2 types of communication. You have toll speech quality, or you have business communication quality. The 2 are not the same, but depending on what you're willing to build your infrastructure to support will dictate the quality of service, or the mean opinion score, the MOS. It's got to be a 4.0 or better for it to be a suitable toll quality. These are the things you have to learn and understand, and once you do that, you can do wireless, you can do wired, a hybrid of both, and it's a great. And as Joey pointed out, he's doing stuff he couldn't do with a wired POTS line anymore. So there's a lot of stuff out there. You just got to look for it.
All right. So, Joe, earlier you mentioned the company Vitality, and you lost Joe. Okay. All right. Well, that's because he's on a weak floppy connection way out there. Hey,
Vitality.
So Chris,
I went to the website. Looks good.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah. So, Chris, I'll ask you, and I think I know some of the answers here. If it's not available, that is a separate drop for my new SIP service from some provider, but I'm going to use an internet connection to do that. I guess one of the things that Joe suggests to people is that, well, get a separate internet connection for your phone calls. It's going to cost you $100 a month or whatever your separate internet drop costs, but just get a whole separate drop for your internet calls. Is that the first piece of advice that you would agree with?
Yeah, actually, that you take that approach, and here's why. If you're in a business, say we're a major corporation, we're in a multi-level floor building, and we're a corporation XYZ, and we have VoIP phone systems, say a Avaya or a Nortel system. Typically, what you would do is you'd build out your infrastructure in two ways. One, you do the VLAN for your VoIP traffic. Then you do another VLAN for your office traffic. And why do you do that? So that you can guarantee quality of service and a class of service for your VoIP to give you the robustness that you've come accustomed to for the last 100 years of a standard traditional dial-up phone line, or PBX. Yeah. So since maybe you're a small business or you're an operation that doesn't have the luxury of doing it that way, so go with a separate internet connection and treat that as your ad hoc VLAN approach. So rather than, say, spend lots of money on bandwidth coming into your building and then breaking it out into VLANs and managing a switch, just take a separate line coming in, internet line, and dedicate that just to voice traffic. That way, your office traffic doesn't collide excessively with your VoIP, and your quality and class of services don't get destroyed. That's what Joe is recommending, and it makes total sense. So, in an office where you have a small group, say you have a 20-person office, and you're doing a lot of stuff, internet research, whatever you call it, but now you want to do VoIP phones because your traditional copper dial tone is just too costly. There's a good chance you couldn't make both of them survive unless you're willing to manage the network, which means, doing a proper managed switch, proper managed VoIP system, the whole bit. Go with the separate connection, and in that way, you've sort of created your own diversity for the packets. There's no chance for one to get onto the other. So you don't have to worry about VLANs.
There's another point that actually I hadn't crossed my mind until you started talking about reasons to have a second drop. If with most of the time with an internet connection, our desire is speed. We want to download our email quickly. We want to be able to watch 2 movies at the same time from Netflix or whomever. Speed seems to be pretty important. With VoIP services, a VoIP phone call is going to be about 90 kilobits per second of packet. If with VoIP, speed is not the ultimate, bandwidth, I should say. Bandwidth is not the ultimate arbiter of what service should you get. A 50 megabit service is not going to work any better for you than a 5 megabit service if 5 megabits is all you need, or less than that. Of course, you want to have as much upload bandwidth as you need to. And remember, calls are two-way, so it's about 90 kilobits per second for a regular VoIP call in either direction at the same time. So if it were me, and I guess at my stations it will be me, we have a cable modem service for most of our business needs. But if I get a second drop, I'm going to try to get a DSL drop that, again, higher speed is not important, but being there all the time is important. Being a different provider than my other service is probably important. If I'm smart about it, I should be able to have a way to swap those two if necessary. Using a router that I've pre-configured to handle either way. But again, I guess just go back to the fact that for your home you want speed, but that's not necessarily what you need for VoIP. Joe, am I thinking about that right?
You are, as a rule. DSL has less jitter typically.
Yeah,
yep,
I've heard that.
That's right.
And that's very as compared to cable. Anyway, fiber obviously not an issue, but yeah, DSL tends to be better. So, for example, I have 2 DSL lines here in my house because it has the most. It provides good telephony and it's pretty cheap. I mean, I can get DSL for $16.95 a month here, and it's not fast, but it's adequate and it provides better quality on the phone. So that's what I use for that.
Gotcha. Understood. So Joe, in the remaining minute or that we have here, we already talked about bringing dedicated bandwidth in. If you have a second internet drop, or let's say that you don't have a choice, you got to use the same internet drop. What would you advise engineers to think about using the same internet? And here at my office, I've got the same internet drop for everything I do: Netflix and email, streams going out, this conversation, dial tone from Cleveland, from Telos. What advice would you give to somebody who has to use the same bandwidth for everything?
get the right router. I mean, I had kind of some bad experiences with some sonic walls, so I can't really recommend those for VoIP. I mean, in some situations it's okay to use a home router like a Linksys router with different firmware on it, like called Tomato. I use that a lot for low cost situations. A lot of the routers from MikroTik are excellent for that, and certainly Cisco. Basically QoS it, make sure that the traffic that needs to get there in a timely manner, the traffic that can't be deferred, like voice or video, gets out there first, and it takes precedence over everything else.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. That's what's been my experience here at my place. I used to have, I've gone through a plethora of cheap routers here, and they just kept breaking. and then I got one of those Apple Airport Extreme routers, as it looked like it was well made, and it worked great, but I couldn't go in and adjust the QoS settings. Apple forum said I didn't need to because Apple would handle that for me, but that didn't quite make me comfortable. So I got one of these MikroTik routers, and oh my gosh, it's got a learning curve that's pretty steep for a guy like me. But I got help from Dave Anderson, who's been a guest on here before, and from Internet Forums. So the MikroTik router is set up, and hey, it's working beautifully, and I can have all these different services running at the same time, and I don't see conflicts or problems because we're doing too much of one thing and trying to do something else at the same time. So yeah, great advice. The router makes a difference. It makes a big difference.
The MikroTik is a deal too. I mean, a lot of people don't know how much those things cost, but I mean, you can get a really capable one for like $59.
I've got one. It's down on the floor here somewhere. It's the one I stole from you.
Right.
Yeah. I had it. I was carrying it as a backup. I'm kind of done with it now. I guess I could ship it back to you if you want it back.
Oh, it's okay. I'm sure you'll find a need for it.
At our radio stations, we're putting in the MikroTik routers that have built-in Wi-Fi and have a little color touchscreen, little LCD screens, so that somebody can just go bang on that screen and look at different parameters, how much data is flowing in and out, and such as that. And I mean, this thing's it's under $200. It's $159 or thereabouts for a MikroTik router with all these features.
How do they do that?
I don't know. I think it's Linux, baby.
Oh,
I'm not sure. Oh. Hey guys, we're about out of time, and I could go on for talking for hours and learning from Joe and from Chris about SIP and voice over IP. There's one reference, or several references that I could recommend. We're going to put a few things in the show notes today that we talked about, but one thing is the book that Steve Church and Skip Peasy wrote about AOIP, building IP audio studios with Livewire. That book is available on in Amazon. It's available for the Kindle. It's not cheap. I mean, it's still up in the $45, $50, $55 range, right in there. But that is just an awesome book. It's got a whole chapter on SIP. In fact, I think the SBE has even used that chapter in whole or in part as part of helping SBE engineers learn about SIP. I was stalling here for a second to try to find the here it is. You can get it right here on your Kindle. The book by Steve Church and Skip Peasy. Let's see. I have to go back to the beginning of this thing. Oh, here we go. There we go. There it is. Get that book right there. I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. Really good. Tells you all about audio over IP for your studios, but also good SIP primer. Lots of YouTube videos are out there as well to learn about SIP. It's a technology you're going to have to learn. Don't you think?
But it's worth it.
Absolutely.
So worth it.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're out of time. We better go. Thanks for joining us. Joe Talbot from Power Rump, Nevada. Appreciate you being here. And I got to come visit now that you got your house cleaned up. Is the whole house that way, or just you said
there's
just
parts. There's bedrooms I still haven't turned on yet.
That house is so big. There's bedrooms you haven't been to yet. Yeah,
that's possible too.
Oh my goodness! And I think seriously, your house is probably bigger than a whole floor of Chris Tobin's building in New York.
It's crazy. Bought it at auction. Anyway.
Joe's got 13 bedrooms.
Oh, is that all?
No
13?
Yeah.
Are they individual studios
problem.
for producing shows and stuff? Those short-lived videos that you see and read and watch all the time?
I have right around the corner from me, I have a control room and a studio voice booth, and I just had the window put in last week. and it would be doing stuff like this. But I mean, the bedrooms were actually, these 2 bedrooms were kind of small, so I thought it was a good use for it.
So you're the location that Art Bell's going to use as a backup. Gotcha. Okay.
You sure could.
There you go. There you go. Chris Tobin, the best dressed engineer in radio. Thanks for being with us from Manhattan. I assume that's where you are.
Today I'm at an office across the river in New Jersey, working with a company on some stuff, broadcast group on some video stuff.
Now, if folks want to get in touch with Chris Tobin, not that you're not busy enough, is there some way that they can find you?
The easiest ways is just at my office. We have a support@ipcodex.com. Just drop me a note, or just drop a note, and either myself or one of the other guys will get back to you with your answers to the questions. And for you, Kirk, just as to point out when you were talking about the different routers and stuff, and being able to get all the packets where they need to go, basically what you're saying is you have a managed network, and that way you can ensure your VoIP calls will get through. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, a managed network, exactly.
Yeah, that's the trick.
All right. Our show's thanks, Chris. Our show's been brought to you by the folks at Telos and the Telos VX multi-studio voice over IP phone system. Check it out on the web at telos-systems.com. And I appreciate very much Telos sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech and making it available for you. We've got guests coming up on upcoming shows, including one gentleman that you're going to want to meet, Robert Combs with Cumulus. He is one of the hardest working engineers I've ever met, gets more stuff done, and does fabulous work. He was at that Academy of Country Music Awards Radio Row show that we had going on in Las Vegas just before NAB. And the guy's an engineering machine. I want you to meet him. He's coming up in a couple of weeks here on This Week in Radio Tech. Next week, I may or may not be here. I'll be in Adelaide, Australia, so you'll be in the capable hands of Chris Tobin, Chris Tarr, Tom Ray perhaps will be here. And I think we have a guest next week, too, so we'll see what we can do about that. Also, I want to mention John Keene from NPR Labs is going to be our guest on an upcoming show as well. He'll be talking about a new way to measure loudness and signal level, audio signal. So that's going to be interesting. There was an article about that in Radio World. He'll be talking to us about it as well. Got to go. Thanks to Andrew Zarian and the GFQ Network. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye, everybody.